Welcome to this webinar. We're delighted to have so many of you join us again this afternoon. I'm Namita Srivastava, Policy Officer at the Council of Deans of Health, but some of you might know me from the SLP Welcome event in Manchester. This is a webinar format, so you won't be able to see each other, but encouraging you to interact and introduce yourself and interact using the chat. And there'll be time allocated for questions, so if you put your hand up any time, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen or raise your hand so we can let you speak. Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce today's session on navigating imposter syndrome. I'm delighted to have Corinna Thomas, Senior Programme Lead at the NHS Leadership Academy. Corinna is also an occupational therapist by background. I hope you enjoyed the webinar, and please don't be shy. Feel free to ask any questions. Over to you, Corinna.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us. I thought I'd start with a little bit about myself. So, as already introduced, my name's Corinna Thomas. I'm currently the strategic lead for standards and frameworks at NHS England, but I've had a pretty varied career. I started off training as a nurse far too long ago to remember, really. Didn't enjoy nursing at all because I was scared of the drug trolley and the bureaucracy looking back 30 years ago, but discovered occupational therapy, which at the time I didn't even know existed. So left nursing and went into occupational therapy, completed my degree and had a varied career working internationally in NHS and also in social care, both in the community and acute settings. Thoroughly enjoyed that, and then worked my way up into a management position in social care where I was managing a massive team over a huge geographical patch, which I started to get a little bit despondent about. I guess I didn't really feel I was able to do the job its justice. And then an opportunity came up in education, and I got a senior lecturer post at York St John University, teaching occupational therapy and a little bit on the physiotherapy programme, and ended up staying there for 13 years. And then took voluntary redundancy and came to the Leadership Academy 6 years ago in January, specifically to look at making our leadership programmes accessible by the apprenticeship levy, which we have successfully done. So I guess I've been around and about for quite a while now. I've worked clinically, I've worked in education, and now I work in policy. I've gone from being a basic grade right through, which would now be called a band 5, to a senior leader, and I'm going to try and tell you a little bit about imposter syndrome, or rather my experience of imposter syndrome. And I'd really like this to be an interactive session, if at all possible. So please raise your hand if you want to add, comment, reflect, or ask a question. And as already told by Namita, there will be some time at the end as well. So if we could share my slides, that would be great. Thank you. Next one, please. It's quite funny, as I was preparing this, I thought I actually feel like an imposter delivering this webinar. So that's quite apt, really. So starting on what is imposter syndrome, this is quite a formal definition of it. The behavioural health phenomenon described as self-doubt of intellect, skills or accomplishments among high-achieving individuals. Really, it's more to do with just feeling that you're not adequate, and almost that fear of being found out, being exposed as a fraud. So not being able to internalize success and always having that self-doubt, which can actually lead to anxiety, depression, apprehension of being exposed, as I say. And I think it's from my experience, my personal experience, of those of others, it's hugely variable, as in whether you experience it all the time or just now and then, and to what extent and how much of those symptoms persist for different individuals. Originally, it was linked to high achieving women, and it was very much thought it only affected women who were in high achieving posts, but now it's been acknowledged that it can affect anyone at any time. So really important that we understand it and sort of own it and be aware that probably there's no specific figures, but I've read anything between 10 and 95% of us will experience imposter syndrome at some time in our career. So let's face it, at some point we are all going to feel it, whether it's every now and then or more significantly to the point that it actually impacts some of the work that you do. Next slide, please. So how does it present itself? It presents itself in many different ways. As I say, the biggest one is that whole fear of being found out that you're an imposter, which genuinely isn't the situation. It's that fear of, rather than the fact that you don't have the skills to be in the role or carrying out the task or that you've been asked to do. At its worst, it creates anxiety. It can create depression, definitely low self-esteem. The imposter syndrome's connected to some of those other diagnoses as well as something that's entwined and can be entwined with them. It presents itself in sort of more practical ways as well. So agonizing over tasks, even the smallest tasks, and therefore putting off tasks, procrastinating because you don't want to carry out a task and then feel that you're going to be exposed as not being able to do it. People with imposter syndrome often attribute success to either luck or to others. You'll hear people going, oh, no, it was just luck that I did it well, or it was nothing to do with me, it was the rest of the team. Now, whilst sharing success with others is really important in leadership, particularly, there's a fine line between sharing the success with you and the others and actually attributing success and taking away any of that ownership of it from yourself. Leading on to that, you can be very sensitive to positive feedback. Actually, so I think some people try and avoid feedback because they're so anxious about receiving, whether it's negative or positive. But then actually when they get the positive feedback, it's that feeling of, I don't deserve this, I don't know how to internalize it, I don't know what to do with it, and probably managing constructive feedback better than positive feedback. And all the time downplaying your own skills, your own knowledge and your own ability. I'm not an expert on the sort of reasons why this happened, but I'm certainly an expert at feeling it. Next slide, please. So I wanted to talk a bit about my experience of imposter syndrome in the workplace, and there's recognize that there's 5 different types of imposter syndrome, and when I think about the 5 different types, I seem to resonate with 3 of them, and perhaps see the other 2 more in colleagues of mine, but definitely probably touch on all 5 at different times. But I'll just share a bit about where I think I am. So there's one of the types of imposter syndrome is the perfectionist. I'm always saying to myself, I could have and should have done better. And that feeling of I'm not as good as others, or I'm not as good as others think I am or should be. So for me, I really feel this in meetings, particularly if I'm in meetings with a lot of other senior people or more senior people than me, and I just keep thinking I'm not good enough to be here. I don't have the same skills and knowledge as those around me, and they're going to realize that I shouldn't really be in this room and that I'm not worthy of being in this room. And the way that manifests is to obviously get anxiety and the butterflies in your stomach. Yeah, and then to beat myself up afterwards to say that I should have done better, even if, as I say, I've had feedback that the meeting went well. So that's referred to as the perfectionist. Another type of imposter syndrome is called the expert. So they're quite similar, really, but I don't know everything and I should know more. Definitely, I've had that in different place at different times of my career and even on different days of the week, to be honest. And I think the expert comes out more the longer you've been in a post or in the role. So I feel that I should know everything by now because I've been working in my role for 6 years. And, that's a long time. So I should know everything. And I don't give myself that permission to realize that my roles have changed in 6 years. The world changes in 6 years. The organization I work for changes in 6 years and the world moves on. But so again, that expert for me comes out much more the longer I've been in a role. And actually, probably I would assume that other people would know more the longer they've been in their role as well, which just often isn't the case. And then that natural genius. This is an interesting one. I don't believe I'm naturally intelligent or competent, and it takes me longer to understand and retain new information. For me, I share some personal things now. That's very much come from my childhood. I'm the youngest of 3 and had a very naturally intelligent sister who did brilliantly at school and a brother who did pretty well at school. And I really, really struggled at school and I came out with minimal qualifications. And it took me a lot longer to kind of work out where I wanted to go and how I wanted to do that. I wasn't diagnosed with anything at school, but as an adult, I became apparent that I have dyslexia, which might have been one of the reasons I found things hard at school. And I guess I was just a different and perhaps slower learner. But as a consequence, I got told, and I hope this would never happen anymore, by teachers, parents, and siblings, and sometimes friends, that I was stupid, that I was thick, that why can't you understand this? Why don't you comprehend what we're trying to teach you? So those words follow me through some 50 years later, to be honest, even though I know it's not true now. And actually, when I'm not in a phase of feeling imposter syndrome overwhelming me, I realize how much I've got to share and give others, because I did struggle at school, and then I took some time out and traveled the world and decided what I wanted to do and started my nurse training, which, although I didn't enjoy, I found another occupation within health, and I've excelled at it. I know I have, but I sometimes find it hard to say that. But I now do spend time, particularly with my own children, but other friends' children and young aspiring young adults and students in health, to sort of show that there's no one right path of how you get to where you're going, and you can get there different ways. And whatever happened in the past is in the past, and you don't need to continue to believe that. It's easier said than done, but I do genuinely believe that that whole natural genius thing has a lot to answer for, both from a point of view of, it does take me longer to learn and retain new information. And is that just imposter syndrome, or is it because I have dyslexia? Is it because where's that imposter syndrome come from? Can I track it all the way back to when I was a young child in school? Even though my experience from early 20s of going to university, when I finally found an occupation that I really enjoyed, I was very good at. But, it's an interesting concept. How long does it take for these, for those feelings to either be acknowledged and managed? So sometimes I think, is it imposter syndrome? But actually, labels don't really matter. Anyway, next slide, please. So looking at how it impacts other people, the other of the 5 types of imposter syndrome, one is called the soloist. And that's the kind of fear of asking for help and constantly questioning your own competence or ability. And as I say those words, I can picture one of my team members who's absolutely amazing, but still will regularly ask questions, when I believe they know the answer, and also sort of as a checking and almost getting permission before doing things that they're completely within their capability to do without that authority or seeking that authority. And again, you know, that is part of being an imposter syndrome, not believing you've got the ability to do it yourself, but equally it could just, it can also be a habit that's been, or not a habit, but something that someone has developed because of the way they've been managed in the past. And so it's difficult to always identify where these behaviors come from, but definitely that continuously asking for help, which isn't a bad thing, by the way. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but particularly when you're asking for help for things that the individual is more than capable of doing. And then the last one is the super person. That's the person who believes they've got to be the hardest worker, never say no to anything, probably work overtime just to be worthy of their role. And they've got to always strive to be the best at everything. That's an interesting one because, again, it's an acknowledged part of imposter syndrome. I've seen it in many colleagues. I'm not sure that I personally have ever struggled with this one myself, but it can be also for other reasons other than imposter syndrome, or it can be attributed, the reason the imposter syndrome has come to the fore. We've just gone through a massive restructure in NHS England, and 2/3 of the workforce lost their jobs. So there was a huge culture of perhaps working hardest, staying latest just to try and save your job. So that's not necessarily always because of imposter syndrome, but related to this conversation, it's that whole feeling if I've got to kind of overprove myself all the time because I'm not worthy of the role that I've been given. Next slide, please. So a lot of this is similar to how it presents itself, but how imposter syndrome impacts me. And then I'll talk about others and the team. So regularly I say to myself, one day whoever they might be on that particular day, will realize I'm not up to this. I'm not worthy to be here. And obviously, if you're thinking that, that's going to have repercussions in the way that you present yourself. But often the issue about imposter syndrome is that you don't present in a way that other people can necessarily fully believe or understand what you're going through. I'm certainly quiet in meetings, and I've put hierarchy there. I think for me, if I'm with people I know and I trust, like my direct team, then I'm fine. Even if I'm talking about things I'm not 100% sure about, or it's new information, I feel safe to discuss it. I feel safe to get things wrong or to say I don't know the answer to that. But if I'm in a large meeting of people I don't know, or people who are more senior than me, then I lose that confidence, and I just tell myself that I shouldn't speak because I might be wrong, and that I shouldn't be speaking out in front of people who are more senior than me, which is absolute rubbish. And I genuinely don't believe that's come from the top down to me. It's all internalized by myself. I can put off tasks. Who can't? Sometimes because I don't enjoy doing them, but a lot of times it's because I don't think I'm good enough to do them. And so I would double check and over prepare, and perhaps spend more time procrastinating and writing them than is necessary. So that links back to the sort of perfectionist in me, that if I'm doing something I find difficult, I want to do it to my utmost best. And again, that's not a bad thing. And a lot of what imposter syndrome is can be a motivator as well, as I say at the bottom there. And that's no bad thing if it makes you strive to be the best you are, but it's having that fine balance, I guess. And I definitely do downplay my own intelligence, and I will often say it's down to others. And as I said earlier, that's not a bad thing. I believe in sharing glory, and most things I do as part of a team, it's very rarely down to just me, but I kind of downplay my role within that team as well. So yeah, again, all of these things is all about balance. And I definitely get embarrassed by positive feedback, particularly if it's given in a public arena. So we have a culture where I work of shout outs, where people will shout out colleagues who've done something well, and I literally live in dread of that happening. But if someone just sort of quietly says, well done, that's far more acceptable to me. And I think that's probably fairly normal, to be honest. So looking at the team and the impact, I guess if I look at the impact my behaviour has on others, I would say that obviously by procrastinating things, I sometimes leave them to the last minute, which isn't fair on others. By being quiet in meetings, I'm not getting my voice heard, and I would normally speak out if it impacts people I represent and support, but sometimes I know I've perhaps not spoken out when I probably really should have done. And again, downplaying my intelligence is perhaps not such a good thing when you're a senior leader, because people want confidence in their senior leaders, and to have that confidence that you do know what you're doing. That said, I think they probably do have that confidence, and because a lot of this is internalized, as I keep saying. If I look at how IS impacts others, I think I've seen all these behaviours with other people, both senior to me, peers of mine, and probably junior to me, and at all stages of people's careers. So as I've said already, you know, I've had these feelings as a junior member of staff right through to today, and I'm probably until I retire. And it escalates and calms down at different points. So trigger points for me is starting a new role. Clearly, you're going to have more feelings of misdoubt and mistrusting yourself when you're in a new role, or even in a new situation. I've just started a new piece of work in a large project, and the content of the project is quite new to me. So a lot of these feelings have risen to the surface, even though I know that I was put in this position because I have the skills to do it. So I think it's just having that awareness that if I'm feeling it, we know that up to 95% of others will be feeling it at some point, and therefore other people in the room or other people in your team are going to be feeling the same as well. Next slide, please. So the coping strategies, this is actually my last slide. And I will preempt this with saying it's all easier said than done, for sure. But reflection is a massively good, useful tool for me. And I mean positive reflection rather than beating myself up. So it's easy to come off a situation and then overthink it. And I'm very good at that, and overanalyze what's gone on and get too much into the detail and worry about, did I say that right? Did I come across right? But more of a reflection on the bigger picture, I guess. For me, owning the feelings and sharing with trusted others. I'm very lucky that I have a team that I know and I've worked with for a while. I have a fantastic line manager, and I can have open, honest conversations with them and be very honest, blunt, and say, this is how I'm feeling. And nearly every time I've had a conversation like that, the other person has said, don't worry, I get it all the time, or I was feeling it too in the same meeting, whatever. But having that ability to share with others is hugely important, whether it's within work or with family or with friends, or with all three. But if you can find someone that you can have that conversation with, then that's really, really beneficial. Trying to seek that feedback rather than avoid it. As I said before, I'm quite good at asking for feedback, constructive feedback, because I like to learn and improve. But if people give me positive feedback, I find that harder to take. So it's not avoiding those opportunities or those situations, but actually looking for them as well for that affirmation, and certainly supporting my colleagues and my team to get the feedback as well, and actually to hear it. I think it's really important not to be afraid to make mistakes. And again, as I say, this is easier said than done. And I do appreciate different people have different support networks around them, and you need to be able to feel safe. You need to feel safe to make mistakes. And perhaps in your working environments back in the clinical world, it depends what we mean by mistakes, isn't it? And so I don't want to make light of this point, but that whole thing about sort of being allowed to try things, make mistakes within conversations, have those conversations and be able to talk to your team, to your supervisor, to those around you. And it doesn't matter if you say something wrong, because that's how we all learn, but you have to be in an environment where you feel you can do that. So hopefully you have got that where you work. I think a bit about that seeking feedback is acknowledging and celebrating success. So again, probably not overly good at doing that myself, but actually it's really important to sit back and think, yeah, okay, that did go well, and I can acknowledge that I had a role in that, and I'm going to reflect on that and think about how that makes me feel, but also how it makes those around me feel, or what impact it's had on the project that I'm delivering, etc., etc. And to sometimes actually celebrate that success, whether it's just with a pat on my back or a cup of tea or a glass of wine or whatever it is. It's important to celebrate that success within myself, but also with pertinent others around you. And I guess the last thing for me is just to try and stop comparing yourself to others. I think that I always do that, and the comparison is always, I'm not as good as them. Rarely will that be true for any of us. We're all different, and that's really important. But if you start having that, sharing your feelings and having those conversations with trusted others, you start to realize that you are as good as other people. You all bring different things to a situation. And actually comparing yourself is really unhelpful most of the time, or at least I find it to be. So give yourself permission to stop comparing yourself to others. Give yourself permission to celebrate your own successes as well as the successes of others. Give yourself permission to make mistakes and to look for that feedback and to accept that positive feedback. And give yourself permission to sort of own imposter syndrome if you feel it, so that you can share it with others and accept that it is part of most people's working life, and that it can be managed and you can do things proactively about it. And as I think health workers are all really good at reflection, so use reflective logs or spend time on your commute home, whatever it is, just reflecting on everything, not just the bad, and assuring yourself that you've done not as well as you could have done that day, but actually you've done pretty damn well. And it's okay if it hasn't all gone perfectly. And I guess just the last thing I'll say is, clearly, if imposter syndrome is a big part of your life, it can lead to things like depression and anxiety. And if you're in the unfortunate position where it is more serious and it's taking over your life, then obviously please do seek help from professionals as well as your colleagues and friends around you. But I'm hoping, I guess this sounds like I have imposter syndrome the whole time and I really struggle the whole time. But for me, I'm very fortunate. It crops up every now and then. I can go for weeks without feeling it. I can go for weeks for feeling it every day. But I know it's always there. So everybody's different, but keep a check on how you are feeling and how much it's impacting your life. And again, it's having that internal conversation and conversation with others, I guess. I have to think, is it Is it always imposter syndrome? Does it matter whether it is, or is it maybe my dyslexia kicking in? Is it because I'm going through menopause? And let's face it, menopausal women forget things. I'm always forgetting things. I forget words. I'm not as organized as I used to be. So some of that anxiety could be coming from that. I've never really tried to identify whether it's this, that, or the other. If I'm having these symptoms of being unkind to myself and feeling that I may not be worthy of the role I've got, I think it's probably a combination of a lot of things, but definitely imposter syndrome is in there. And interestingly, when I was a lecturer at York St John University, we talked about it, and students used to talk about imposter syndrome right from pre-registration, and we still talk about it in senior meetings with colleagues now. So it is probably going to be part of all of our lives. So we need to embrace it, own it, and almost make it become a friend. I think that's all I've got to say, but I've seen a couple of comments saying that it resonates, so perhaps I'd like to say that's good. I wouldn't wish it upon anyone, but it's good that people are relating to what I've said. It's been quite a quick whistle tour, but any questions, any reflections, any thoughts, happy to take.
Thank you very much, Corinna. That was really interesting, and I think it is really hitting home with people. So I think that's really resonating, as you say. So that's really good. I've got a couple of questions about feedback. So I've got a question from James, who's at the same time as feeling embarrassment at positive feedback. Have you ever experienced or seen other people experience being over-reliant on positive feedback to prove you're doing well, needing external validation, but because of lacking internal validation? This can be a difficult position to be in. And then from Sarah, she's talking about negative feedback, and she really struggles with receiving that because to her, it confirms the imposter feelings or feeling not good enough. Do you have any tips on to deal with negative feedback or constructive criticism? So can you take those two questions?
Yeah, sure. So negative, constructive feedback, I completely get where you're coming from, that it can reinforce those feelings that you're not good enough. For me, it's very much how you're given that feedback, and I'm hoping it's being given in a constructive way rather than in a negative way, and that it's given in a supportive way. It's always hard to hear that you could have done something better, but if you use it as a learning opportunity, to take on, because we do feel imposter syndrome, but we can also get things wrong. Sometimes you think, oh, I could have done better, and actually I genuinely could have done better, and it's not just that feeling, and it's not all just smoke, really. So it's that fine line. So I think taking feedback, both constructive and positive, it has to be part of our everyday lives if we want to progress, if we want to improve, if we want to deliver the best care to our patients, or the people, the population we serve. So I don't have any quick fixes other than the more feedback you seek and receive, I think the better you get at managing that, and to have the confidence to be able to challenge and ask and reflect from the person you're getting that feedback from, and ensuring you're getting it in a caring environment and in the right way. And if you're not, calling that out. Did I answer both, or did I only do
Very
one?
much you did. I think that's Corinna. Yeah, I've got a question about dealing senior people. So in situations with senior people, how do you overcome that imposter syndrome? This person feels that even though they belong in that space, they personally find themselves telling themselves they don't belong there and provide no value. So how do you deal with people more senior than yourself?
When I'm in a situation with more people senior than me, that's exactly when I get it. Again, I think it's having that internal conversation with yourself that you do know things, but also, again, I think we're getting kinder with each other, and we definitely have a culture in the NHS England about acknowledging reflective thinkers and not having to come up with the answer straight away in meetings, not having to have an opinion immediately, and that's really helped me So it's definitely a culture I foster. So there's a lot of people who aren't able or don't feel confident, whether it's imposter syndrome or just the way that they learn, take on new information, that they may not have the answer straight away. And having that sort of environment is really helpful because, as I say, you can give a considered and perhaps over-prepared answer at a later date. But if you're not in that situation, I guess it's going back to that whole thing about you should be in an environment, hopefully, where you can make mistakes. And if people are more senior than you and you put your thoughts forward on the whole, I'm sure they will be valid and validated, and those thoughts will be worthy and interesting and contribute. However, if something you say doesn't land well, that's okay too, because we're allowed to make mistakes and we're allowed to have different opinions. It's giving yourself that permission. And I guess the more you do it, again, the better you get at it. And there'll just be days when you don't believe it's working. And for me, I then just have to get through that day, think, okay, there's nothing I can do about that now. Perhaps go and seek some feedback from someone else who was in that meeting to see whether it was as I'm feeling it was, or whether actually they saw the meeting, they interpreted my reactions to the meeting in a different way to me, which more often than not they do. And then moving on, I think, and stop internalizing it, certainly trying to put it to bed before I go to bed, because everybody thinks at different times. But if I can't put my thoughts to one side before it's sort of the evening, I can literally worry myself to stay awake all night. That's really unhealthy. So it's finding whatever works for you to make sure that in as many situations as possible, you don't allow that to happen.
Yeah, it's negotiating those situations, isn't it, really? I think I've got a couple of questions about negotiating placement. So, Fiona, if I've pronounced that correctly, on placement as an adult nursing student, it's really difficult to negotiate the theory practice gap to get up to speed in the clinical environment, especially in an acute medical environment, where the individuals that we care for could become very unwell very quickly. At times, my stomach is in a complete knot. Do you have any tips to manage it in the moment? And if I can bring it up another one as well, as a student nurse, I frequently come across supervisors who are unwilling to work with students and be very dismissive of what I do and do not know, particularly when it's my first time on placement in a specific area. It really makes me question what I do know and if I'm behind where I should be at this stage in my training. Any advice in handling this? Is there anything I can use to start conversation with those supervisors? So, any
That
comments about
saddens me
negotiating
just to hear
placement?
your situation. Yeah, that should, oh, yeah, I'm sorry you've ever been put in that situation. And again, there's no quick fix. A fast-paced environment is really difficult, isn't it? Because you don't have that privilege that I'm now in a, office-based role, and I can have all these coping mechanisms because I'm not on a ward with a sick person right in front of me. But I think it's all about those relationships you have with the people around you. And if your supervisor or your mentor doesn't give you that support or genuinely doesn't believe that they want to work with you, you need to call that out with someone else. That's not acceptable in this day and age. So do you have someone else in the team you can go to, your tutor at the university, or someone else in the team that you're working with on placement? So dealing with it as much as you can for you as an individual, and without knowing the situation and without knowing you as an individual, it's hard to give advice other than open communication. For me, is it's difficult to bring it up, but 99% of the time it resolves those issues. But also feeding it back for future. If there is somebody who genuinely doesn't enjoy working with students, then perhaps they shouldn't be, and or they need help from their line manager, etc., to be able to have discussions why. And from my experience of both working in a clinical environment as well as being the placement lead for OTs and physio students when I worked at university, staff who don't like working with students often feel intimidated by students, and that's where their probably imposter syndrome is coming in themselves, thinking I'm not worthy of imparting knowledge and teaching this young person. I think one of the people who've asked the question said they're a little bit an older student, so again, maybe that's coming into play. But I guess it's being kind and trying to think, why do they not want to work with me? Why are we having these? Why do I feel this? Is it entirely me? Is it coming from them? And if you can't resolve it, move to question either their manager or a tutor, and get support elsewhere.
Thank you, Corinna. And well, someone who really relates to what you're experiencing with your dyslexia, they're autistic. What's it now? Experienced a lot of stigma in the past that these insecurities tend to resurface in situations, usually ones I'm unfamiliar with. I'm not good enough, and I'm going to be found out. Can you perhaps comment on that?
Only to say it's normal. I think we all feel like that, and perhaps more advanced if you do have, if you are neurodiverse, and sometimes you are struggling to understand or to adapt to what is considered, to a different way of interpreting the world. I don't know that I've got, yeah. I feel for you. I empathize. Again, being honest about everything if you can. It's up to you what you disclose, but if you're able to say, this is me and this is where I struggle and this is how I want to engage, this is the area I struggle in engaging, then that will all be to the good in the future.
I have a question from Justina. All of us sitting home, I have terribly high standards and often feel like an imposter in nursing. How do I get others in nursing to value my past experience previous to nursing? People come with a lot of experience, don't they, that is relevant, that's come from different areas. So how do you get people to value that?
I wish I had a magic wand and answer for all these questions. They're complex, aren't they? I think again, people will only know what your past experience is and and what value you can bring if you can share that with them. So it's sharing it with it up front, acknowledging that there's so much more to nursing than knowing what's in the textbook. Having those conversations both formally and informally. I remember having a student myself who almost a couple of weeks through the placements, almost exactly what your question is about, how come you don't value all this wonderful experience I come with? But she'd never shared that experience with me. I'd always been wondering what she had done prior to coming into training as an occupational therapist. She was an older student, but she never shared it with me. So there's something about not expecting people to know what they don't know and celebrating that experience and actually offering it to the fore. And if it's then not taken and not what's the word I'm looking for, not celebrated or acknowledged, I don't have a magic answer for that other than keeping those communication channels open.
And James has just commented in the box that he finds it helpful to develop a realistic view of other people's abilities, not putting others down. But as a healthy professional, it's also important to give colleagues, students accurate and constructive feedback. Do you agree that helping others to address how would you help others to address their imposter syndrome?
I think it's that open, honest conversation. It's sharing and it's showing your own vulnerabilities. I'm more than happy, clearly, to talk about my own imposter syndrome. So again, I find it useful to talk about it to others and have those trusted friends where you can say, I'm feeling it now. And I would hope that people could come to me with a similar, in reverse, saying, this is where I'm at, or at least have that with other people. Genuinely being able to not call it out, but so I have had colleagues where I'm thinking this is what's happening for them and they haven't shared it. So perhaps taking a bit of time to have a conversation with them, bringing it up if I felt comfortable and that was appropriate, and asking if that's what they might be feeling, and if so, would they like help? Can I help? And sharing those coping strategies that that I've developed, and to be honest, they're well documented as well.
Very much, Corinna. It's been really, really useful, really helpful. I think we're coming to the end of our time now. I don't think there are any more questions. And wait, I'll give people a chance to put the questions in the box if they want to. Any more questions for anybody, or should we draw the session to a close? I think that's probably the end. So thank you so
very much for
Corinna.
coming.
I'd like to thank Corinna for taking time out of her very busy schedule to speak to us today. I hope this session has been of value to all. It's definitely been valuable for us. So thank you, Corinna. I believe there should be a feedback poll on your screen coming up. Please, I'm not sure it's coming up now or not. Is there a feed screen coming up or?
Oh, sorry, it's just yeah, but you can go on. I will put it on if you want.
So please do fill in the feedback screen, and we'll welcome your feedback. Thank you. And a reminder that we have more webinars coming up. The next one will talk about influencing and leadership on November the 13th. All these details will be shared on the SLPX Twitter account. One final thank you to Corinna for speaking to us today. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day. Thank you very much.